This video is going to talk about how to translate a function given directions and how to write down that function. So the first translation we're going to talk about is left and right. And when I'm talking about something that's shifting left or right, I need to remember that this is going to be inside parentheses. And that's where these happen. Okay. And if there is no parentheses written in my equation, then I'm going to have to put them in. So when I'm looking at this equation right here, it's not given with parentheses at all. So the parentheses are going to exist around the x. This is where the parentheses are because they're not written. That means that my -5, well, that's shifting it up and down, okay? And we're doing a left and right. So we're asked to take this function that's given right here, and we're talking about making that translate 4 units left. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite this guy and say, well, I've got this new function, g of x, and I'm going to have some sort of a translation, right, 4 units left, but it still had this -5 there in the given f of x, right, this given f of x equation. So this -5 is moved down here. Okay, I want it to translate 4 units left, which means I'm asking it to move that way 4 units. And inside parentheses, I'm going to write this down over here, that inside the parentheses, the sign is backwards, right? So I've got a backwards sign for my left and right. So if it's moving this way, it's a positive sign when I put it in. If it's moving this way, it's a negative sign when I put it in. Okay. So I'm going to say that I'm moving it 4 units to the left, so I'm going to say +4 inside here. Well, that's not the only way I can write this. There's really only a power of 1 on this, so I can distribute this one out here through my parentheses because I don't need to do any foiling or anything first. So I could just distribute this through, right? This gives me x plus 4 and -5, and so I'd get g of x equals, and say, well, +4 minus 5 is a -1. And that is my new function after the directions on how to translate it. So I started with this guy, and I've ended up here, and I changed my f of x to a g of x, saying the f of x was given and the g of x is now the new equation. And that's just a notation to say that. Okay, so I'm going to do another one, but this one is asking me to translate it to the right. So I'm looking now at this problem, and it's saying given your function, we want to translate it 2 units to the right. And we know that left and right, well, that is inside parentheses. And I'm going to say, well, we know that these are backwards from the direction that we're going on the x-axis. So if I have 2 to the right, that's telling me I'm going 2 units this way. And that would give me this guy right here, and that makes it a minus sign. And I would rewrite this function and say I put this new function, g of x. And I'm going to put my little parentheses in here and say, well, I need to be able to put that shifting left to right inside my parentheses, just like I've set up here. So I need those parentheses written. So when I write this down, I go, I've got this x and a +2, right? This guy, this 2 has moved it down. He's moved down to here. I put in my parentheses, moved them down. My x is now moved down. And now I'm going to do this 2 units to the right. And when it's to the right, I'm putting in this minus sign. So it's going to be minus 2. Okay, there's really a power of 1 right here, so I don't have to do any foiling or any kind of distribution with it itself. So I'm going to clear my parentheses and say I'm going to get my x minus 2 and then this plus 2. And so g of x equals, well, x minus 2 plus 2, well, that's 0. Or this is g of x equals x. All right, again, I started with an f of x. That's what was given. I made the translation and I rewrote it as g of x, saying once I do this translation, I've got this new equation called g of x. Okay. Now I'm going to talk about up and down, and up and down is going to be outside of parentheses, so I'm going to write that down. This is outside of parentheses. Okay, or, absolute value brackets, however the grouping symbol is written. And I'm going to talk about these two equations here. I think I'm going to rewrite this guy down just a little bit. I'm going to write him down here. F of x equals the absolute value of x plus 4, just so I can give myself just a little bit more room. And that way I can work with just this guy right here and have some space to do it. So I'm given that f of x equals 2x minus 9, and I need to translate this 6 units up. And when it's up and down, it's outside of parentheses or absolute value brackets. Well, I'm going to put the parentheses where they go, just so that you know where they're at, and it's always around that x. If these are not written down, that's where it's going to be. So your outside parentheses translation is going to still be outside of that x. So when I write down my new function, I'm going to say I've got g of x, and this is going to be 2 and x, and I bring down my minus 9, but I'm going to translate this 6 units up, so that means I'm just adding 6. And it's outside of parentheses, the negative 9 is outside of parentheses, and the 6 is outside of parentheses. And so it gives me g of x equals 2, and negative 9 plus 6 right here, well, that's going to be minus 3. And I really don't need those parentheses right here, so the parentheses that I put in right here, I put them in. I put them in up here, and I don't really need them anymore because there's nothing else aside from the x on the inside. So I'm going to say, well, this is just 2x minus 3. Okay, so I was given something in f of x, and when I rewrote it with this translation, I wrote it in terms of g of x. Okay, we're going to do our last one, and we have an absolute value function, and we're translating this 3 units down, and above up here, this says that anything that's been translated up or down is outside of parentheses or the absolute value brackets. And in our case, we have absolute value brackets. So I'm going to translate this 3 units down and rewrite my function as my new guy with my translation. So I've got this absolute value, x plus 4, absolute value. So my translation of 3 units down is outside of parentheses. I'm going to bring down my 2, and I'm doing 3 units down, so it's minus 3. Okay, so this gives me g of x equals the absolute value of x plus 4, and when I do this math right here, I get minus 3. Again, I started with this function given. They told me how to translate it. This is the equation with the translation, and I refer to it as g of x.